Alright, this is Matt Simmons and welcome to Bible Smack. Alright, so, I've been going through changes over time, and, I didn't want to let people know, and the few people I did let know about my secret, the way I felt about things, they just, they just thought I was always that way, but basically it's just time for me to be honest and give my truth. I am a geocentric American. Alright, so this is a review where basically a lot of people are going to hear it and it just sounds crazy. What I'm telling you is that when I'm sitting here right now, I'm not moving. I'm not moving at 35 miles per second. Just sitting here. I wanted to kind of go over this kind of stuff that probably won't be able to give it the way I wanted to give it. But essentially, the idea is that God has created the earth, and it's basically stationary, and basically the sun and the moon, both, they revolve around the earth, and that the earth is most likely in the center of the universe. Now, let me just say, as I get into this stuff, you get into a new teaching, it sounds a little weird. Cosmology, which is the study of the universe, theory of everything, it is always weird because it's on a scale that's not something that we actually can experience. When we start talking about a star being 1,000,000 times the size of the earth, or even more than that, that's not something that we experience. We can't even walk around the world. We can eventually travel around the world, but we can't just naturally experience any of this stuff. So, as we start talking about cosmology and stuff, we're talking about something that is weird and is different. The cosmology that you've been taught, if you went to a public school in the West or most private schools, it may not be weird to you because you've been taught it since you were a child. But if you really think about it, that is a weird idea. The idea that there was absolutely nothing, and then all of a sudden you had space, stars, all this kind of stuff pop out of nothing. Or the fact that the universe was the size of a pea, and then it became 99% of its current size within 1 second. It's weird. That stuff is moving faster than the speed of light. All stuff is moving faster than the speed of light for a second, with no real point to it. And then we talk about Earth and its relationship to the sun. I want to go ahead and just say how I kind of started coming to these ideas. See, when we start studying the evidence for the Big Bang, we talk about how the Big Bang shows a red tint, and they interpreted that red tint to be the stars and galaxies exiting and spreading out. Well, if you have the Earth right here, and you have a star going that way, and the stars going that way, and the stars going that way and that way, what do you have? You have the Earth is in the center. So, we would say naturally, okay, it's in the center, but then they say, well, no, because the Earth is supposed to be going around the sun. And by the way, when we start talking about that, the Earth moving, the sun moving, if the Earth is not in the center of the universe, then what is the vantage point? Well, there is no center, there is no vantage point, so you don't know how anything's moving in relation to the other. What is not moving in space? Because if you don't have a center, then there's no not moving, and then you can't figure out what movement is philosophically. So basically, that's all relative. All these, planets and stars are all bouncing back and forth, and they have a regular movement, but we don't really, we're not really even able to know why that is or what that is. You go by the evolutionary theory, and if the sun were to create the planets, which is a little odd in and of itself, but if the sun were to create the planets, we would create the Earth after it created all the gases. But instead, all the big gas planets are on the other side of the solar system. So all this stuff is kind of, relative. That's why Einstein came up with that whole general relativity and special relativity. It's all this relative motion. How do you know what's what? And so we start with Earth at the center, and all of our technology was based on the Earth being the center of the universe. Why do I say that? Good question. Well, basically, they would measure the movement of the sun and the stars in the ancient pagan societies. And as they started to measure these things and develop astronomy and astrology, when you look at something like Stonehenge, that is basically a clock. And that clock works from a geocentric, Earth-centered framework. And when we do a lot of these navigations, we use something called an ECI, Earth-centered inertia. And what that means is they've calculated the center of the Earth, and then they start moving from there. So basically, the clocks were all created geocentric because they were determined by the months and the seasons of somebody who's on the Earth. Well, time, is then determined by the movement of the sun around the Earth. Then you have the mechanisms created for that. So mechanics, which is time, the robot does this and the robot arm does that. And these cars, they, move everything according to, these mechanics and stuff. See, all that stuff is actually based off of that Earth-centered, which we could call geocentric understanding. And the only time you really don't have any Earth-centered inertia is if you have a satellite that's out in space and to other planets. But, we don't have any people outside of the moon, and from the moon on back, everything's Earth-centered. So everything we do, all those, trips and all the planes and all that kind of stuff, all that works from an Earth-centered inertia. Something else is kind of weird is that if you took a plane and you flew to, let's say, New York to LA, and then flew from LA to New York, assuming that there's no big storms, no weird wind or anything like that, you're really going to be there the same time. You're going to have the same time for the distance, whether you go from east to west. But if we're moving at 35 miles per second, aren't we going to notice it at some point? Well, anyhow, so I noticed that, the Earth should be the center because that red shift, and also that there was no blue shift. Why didn't we see a blue shift? Well, we're supposed to be calculating it by the Earth moving around the sun. And then we triangulate things with the North Star based on that. So we have this distance and we have the North Star. But what's weird is that, the Earth is always pointing at the North Star. Doesn't matter if it's supposed to be over here or it's supposed to be over there, it's always pointing at that. So between those two facts, that's what started to kind of get the ball rolling. But I didn't try to put the big picture in. I tried to get things, relative to others. But there's a YouTube channel of a guy named Malcolm Bowden. And he really has a lot of good stuff on this. It's just better that you go to that YouTube channel and check out his stuff than me give a full scientific presentation. But I'm going to give a couple things. So, as I kind of went through that stuff, another thing that's kind of an interesting sign to me is the nature of the moon. You know, the moon is always showing its face at us. It doesn't matter if the moon is on this side or the moon's on that side. It's always facing us. It doesn't spin. You could call it spinning about the fact that it rotates, but really, we know what we're talking about when it does spin. It doesn't spin at all. It just faces and faces and faces and faces and faces the earth. That's why they call there's a dark side of the moon. So, you know, God has put together something to where we see the North Star, and then we have a moon facing us, and then everything else is measured. Well, anyhow, they did some experiments over time, and these experiments were supposed to demonstrate heliocentrism, because that was that's what they assumed. And they assumed that because the mathematics just seemed a little easier, and so they figured since the mathematics seems a little easier, then obviously that's the better way to go. But there's a lot of things that over time these understandings get worse and worse. Like, the Earth was the center of the universe if you were in the 1500s or from that time before. But once they switched over to the sun was supposed to replace the Earth as the center of the universe. However, now they have this Copernican principle which says that there is no center. Well, how do you know if there's no center of space? How do you know that space exists? Alright, as I'm looking at my cameraman, I'm about 2 or 3 feet away, and I can figure this is space between us, and that space has a middle point. But if there is no middle to the universe, if the universe doesn't have a shape, then how can we know if the space is even real? You can't, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. There has to be a center to the universe, at least. So, basically, there were some other guys who, you know, they got into the mathematics and stuff, and they really started focusing on heliocentricity and stuff and trying to do everything there. But some guys, they've worked on geocentrism as a fantasy. What I mean by that is they're not Christians or anything, but basically, just as a scenario, they've been working on geocentrism, and the thing that's been scary is that it's working out. You know, they don't even believe it, but they can prove it works. So, you know, you had a physicist named Mach, and he was arguing with Newton, and basically, you know, he explained that when we talk about Coriolis forces and the things that we usually say will prove heliocentrism, you can reverse it and it'd be fine. Instead of the Earth spinning, and that makes things like your toilet bowl flush a certain direction, you know, usually the same if it's in the northern hemisphere and the opposite if it's in the southern. Instead of things like that, we find that if the Earth is not spinning, then everything's spinning around the Earth. And so all the stars, okay, will be spinning, and the stars spinning with billions of stars and all that gravity, it's going to be pulling upon the Earth and having the same effect. And even guys like Einstein are quoted as saying that, you know, there's no observational evidence that says this means the Earth is moving and this means the universe is not. Okay, so that's some of the things going on there. There were a series of experiments done. One was called Airy's failure, and what Airy's failure is about is trying to figure out, is it the stars that are moving or is it the Earth that's moving? And obviously they thought the Earth was moving and spinning. So as the stars go by, the Earth is supposed to be moving, and what he decided to do to prove the experiment was he made a giant telescope, and the telescope had water in it. They filled it with water because the water would slow down the passage of the light. So as you have this spin of the Earth, okay, and things get lower, then the telescope would have to bend, because all of a sudden it was slower. Okay, and basically, if the telescope didn't bend, then it's the stars that's moving. But if the telescope did have to bend more, okay, then obviously it is because the Earth is moving. Problem? Airy failed. It's Airy's failure because he was going to prove that it was the Earth that was moving and have to tip his telescope. He didn't tip his telescope. So that was the first experiment. And then you had Michelson-Morley, where you had two laser beams being bounced off of the moon and coming back. All right, you had like Paris, there was a laser beam. In Michigan, there's a laser beam, and they hit the Earth. Sorry, they hit the moon, and they came back. And space, they assumed that space had a substance, and that substance was, how we got light to come all the way to us. Because how do we determine how fast matter goes? Well, when they hit it, they both came back, and it was about 5 kilometers per second, which seems fast to, you and me, but compared to the whole Earth spinning, it should have been 35 miles, probably like 70 kilometers per second. And I say that where I'm at in North America, if you were at the equator, it would have been 42 miles per second. If you were at the North Pole, it would be 2 miles per second. But anyway. So basically, as they did this, if the ether is moving past, then the ethereal realm, okay, the substance of space, if that's moving past, then one of the light beams should be slower because it would be working against the current. And the other one would be faster because it would be going with the current. So what happened? Well, it was 5 kilometers per second, which was not at all capable of spinning the Earth and getting it around the sun. So they decided, they puzzled for 20 years over it, and there was one physicist named Lorentz, and he came up with some ideas for it, and then Einstein decided he would solve it, and his way of solving it was saying there was a null result, and so that there is no ether. The problem is that there was some ether, because there was 5 kilometers per second. And that's enough for the space to spin around the Earth, even though it wasn't enough for the Earth to revolve around the sun. The next experiment was to prove, or there's 2 other experiments to prove the existence of the ether. One was the Sagnac experiment, and the other was Michelson-Gale. Michelson working with a new guy named Gale, and one was a square like a baseball diamond, and the other was a rectangle, and I think they did about the same thing. And let's say like with that baseball diamond, what they did was they put that, let's say imagine you put it on a baseball diamond on top of a record player. Okay, so you got a record spinning around, and the record would spin 6 times per second. But on top of that was this diamond. And when I say diamond, it would be like this point, this point, this point, this point. And they shot a photon and split it into 2. And it went to where they would both race and go back to the home base. Okay, and they would race the opposite ways and go back home. And when they did that, they were spinning. So if Einstein is correct, then I think this is Michelson-Gale. If Einstein's correct, then they should come back evenly. Okay, well, as it turns out, one was behind the other. And so that which you have with Michelson-Gale and the Sagnac experiment is proof that there was something to drag and slow down the photon light. And so if there's something to drag it, that would be the substance that we call ether. Because light was going through it, and yet it was dragging the light more than it could. So with those experiments, it kind of said, all right, well, the Earth's not really moving. But instead we kind of went with other theories like Big Bang and stuff like that. Well, once I kind of got to that point where I saw, okay, there's stuff that says that the Earth might not be moving, and there's this North Star that we're always under, and that you have space kind of going out from us. At that point, I said, okay, maybe this is geocentric. So we check our Bible. Now in the Bible, it says something that's kind of funny. It says that there is night and day. The day was on the first day. God said, let there be light. But then it's not until day 4 that we see the stars and the sun and everything that's dictating day and night. So what's going on there? Well, the bigger deal is that if you have the earth on day 1, and the earth is formless and void, but it's there. In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. If the earth is there, how can it be spinning and then spinning around the sun? There's nothing for it to spin around. Okay? So, I mean, at that point, that's when you say, okay, this is designed geocentrically. I mean, it just explains things that way. There's some other passages, though, that are interesting. One is a passage, it's poetic in nature. And I'll say this, when we talk about the universe is not a word in the Bible. So there is some leeway with this. And typically I was trained and I went along with the idea that when the Bible talks about the sun rising and setting and any of the sun's movements, it's saying relative to our perspective. And so if the earth is spinning and it's spinning around the earth, it's not a make or break for the faith. It really isn't. And I recognize, even though I'm seeing Bible passages which will lead me more to a geocentric conclusion, it is not a make or break of the faith, and it is not a slam on anyone who believes in geocentricity. Sorry. It's not a slam on anybody who believes in heliocentricity. It's just which is more likely, because as we said, the universe is not a word in the Bible. Well, when I look at, I think first I'm going to look at Psalm 19. I'm getting there. Beautiful holiday music right there, everybody. Alright, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth the knowledge. And there is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. So the sky is a tabernacle for the sun. Okay. Now, the Bible talks about the heaven and the earth, and it talks about the heavens, plural, of the earth. If you look at the old translations, especially King James, but in many of the old translations, even the Jewish ones and the Catholic ones and stuff like that, it says heaven and earth in Genesis 1, and then in Genesis 2 it says heavens and the earth, because you have a canopy erected, okay, between the firmaments. Well, the firmament of the sun is a tent over the sun. It's stretched out tight for the sun, and so the sun is dwelling there. And he says, their line has gone out throughout the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he set a tabernacle for the sun, where is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth strong as a strong man to run a race. Okay, now here's the question. If the bride is coming out of the chamber, And in the Jewish wedding, the bridegroom is always coming. He's always coming to grab the bride. Okay. So if he's coming out of his chamber and he runs a circuit, now a circuit is a circle. Okay. When you have circuits, we kind of go back and forth. But he comes out and he runs a circle to the ends of the earth. All right. Is it the same as if he was just not moving at all? See, the scripture, this is Psalms. You could say it's poetic. Poetic doesn't mean it's false. Poetic doesn't mean that it's not saying what it's saying. It's just saying it in a more subjective tone. But it's running that race. And what does it say? It says, his going forth is from the end of heaven, and his circuit under the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Nothing hid from the heat thereof. That's going to be a good point for a second, though. And basically, he's a strong man to run a race. So the Son is moving, and the Son of God is moving for us. He is our Savior. He's coming to save our souls. He is doing something. He is active. Okay, as opposed to he just sits there and we do everything. A big passage that really points to geocentricity is found in Joshua chapter 10. Alright, it says this. This is 10:12. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun and the moon are to stand still. Okay? And when you talk, you say, here's the action, here's the subject. What's the subject? Heliocentrism says the earth is a subject because the earth is moving. But Joshua doesn't speak to the earth, he speaks to the sun and the moon. And when he tells the moon to stand still, that means the moon was not standing still. The moon was revolving around the earth. The heliocentrist totally agrees with that. But that's going to be a problem for a heliocentric Christian, because now you say that the moon is revolving around the earth, but yet the sun, with the same language, is not. And by the way, how would that make any sense? How would it make sense to talk to the moon and the sun when you want the earth to do something? And even if you get the earth to do something, even if Joshua does that hurdle, the other problem is that the earth would hit a lot of damage if it stopped rotating. Seas would shift, millions would die, it would be a great calamity. And, you'd say, well, we're just gunning for a miracle. Okay? So, basically, you really make the scripture have blind faith to the skeptic in order to do something that the scripture's not even trying to do. Because if the universe is revolving around the earth, and the universe is stopped, there's no life in the universe. Okay? So there's no life in the universe, the universe stops, what does it do? It just stops. It doesn't do anything. But then you have to do all these leaps if the earth is the thing that's spinning. So, once again, that makes it way more rational and biblical sounding. And then here's another thing. And, we say, what do we say about this stuff? We say, the Bible's not a science book. And in ways, the Bible's not a science book, but that doesn't mean the Bible does not include science. Do you ever hear scientific figures being brought up in a discussion at a news forum? You could say, well, that's politics, so it's not science. It's not talking science. But yeah, the news forum can bring up science, can it? So let's look at this passage here. I guess that'll be the final passage I bring up for this. But it is... okay, this is Isaiah chapter 38. I'll start at 6. And it says, I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend the city. And this shall be a sign unto thee from the Lord, that the Lord will do this thing that he has spoken. And it says this, Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backwards. So the sun will return 10 degrees, by which the degrees it was gone down. Now, the sundial was the ancient clock, as I was explaining earlier. So when he's saying it's going to go back 10 degrees, which I believe is 2 hours, okay, when it's going back 10 degrees, it's because the sun is going backwards, okay? And so now it's talking about the sun moving, but it's using scientific measurements. Okay, it's talking about moving back degrees of a sundial. That's a scientific measurement, a scientific language. So indeed, the Bible seems very heliocentric, and that's from Scripture alone. But even if I was not in Scripture alone, and I was Roman Catholic, the Church Fathers all agreed with this opinion all the way through the 1500s. And I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Ambrose or Origen or Augustine or Tertullian or Thomas Aquinas, all these guys. And then when the Protestants came out, that's when heliocentrism was invented, and Martin Luther and John Calvin were geocentric. Okay, they rejected it when it came out. They took the stand and rejected it. And there was a Danish Lutheran named Tycho Brahe, who was one of the top astronomers in the world in that day, and he designed a model of the solar system that was modern and geocentric, completely geocentric. But somehow he passed away, and his disciple, Robert Boyle, took all of the information that he had taken down, all of the measurements that he had taken from the solar system, and he reinterpreted them heliocentrically in order to get with Galileo and some of these other guys that Newton followed suit. So what you have there is the modern solar system that we have can be interpreted completely with the Earth at the center. Right? And it's mathematically possible. There's a lot of other scientific stuff to talk about there, and you can look at my writings. This is one aspect of my cosmology I've developed called New Year's cosmology, because the Earth is going to look like that New Year's ball. Okay, it's going to be electromagnetically connected, I believe, to the Polaris, which is the North Star. And when you look at all the triangles and stuff on that round New Year's ball, that is a replica of the Earth's electromagnetic field. Okay, and then also instead of the Earth tilting for the seasons, the universe tilts, and that tilt started during the Great Flood. Okay, so it's the universe kind of flipping up and down as it's spinning around like a big whirlpool. That's another big point. The Earth doesn't move any of this stuff. It's not the Earth moving it. It is the universe itself moving in this ether. So what happens when you have a big whirlpool around you? It's like we're in the eye of the tornado. It's all whirling around us. Okay, it's not that the Earth is doing any of that, and that has been the traditional scientific geocentrism. Let me say some people will try to assume that this is a nutball, nutcase theory type of thing. And so since they say this is a nutball, theory, they'd say, well, you're obviously going to go flat Earth next. No, not at all am I ever going to go flat Earth. And why? Because I base what I believe on the Bible. Okay, the flat Earth theory is not a theory that's from the Bible. Okay, it's from the pagans, from Egypt. There's a new flat Earth thing called the Atlantean conspiracy, and that conspiracy is developed by a New Ager. Okay, and the head of the Flat Earth Society was an evolutionist. When we read that nothing is hid from the heat of the sun in Psalm 19, okay, that's key because the normal flat earthers all believed in a flat disc and that there was earth underneath it. Now, by the way, I'm arguing all this stuff not because we got a lot of flat earthers out there, it's because the atheists will say you're as stupid as a flat earther, okay, and that you're just about to go flat earth next, or some weird accusation, okay. But anyway, it says that it's standing on some sort of giant pillars, okay, and so because it's standing on the pillars, it basically, the problem is that the sun, nothing is hid from its heat, and they usually have the sun and the moon inside a dome, floating around in a circle. Problem is that this pillar would be hid from the sun's heat. Okay? But in fact, the sun goes around. The other thing is the sun rises and sets. Okay? And in that model, the sun is not rising and setting. The sun is going around like that. So once again, that's not biblical. Alright? I believe in the Bible. Okay? It's not just the science that makes me say flat earth isn't true. It is the Bible. All right, the Bible says that it's rising in the east and setting in the west. So what's happening? It's going like this. It says in other passages, and I've got a article called "The Biblical Round Earth." They'll explain this. It says in other passages that God stretched out the heavens over the north. So you have the north. Okay. Well, now we have the sun going east and west. What's doing a circle east and west going to look like? Okay, it says God sits on the circle of the earth, so the earth is a circle, but it's also saying that the sun's going east and west and that nothing is hidden from its sight. Okay, so if the sun's going east to west like this and God is over the north and he's sitting down like this, then nothing is hidden from its heat. It covers everything. The sun rises and sets contradicts that. Okay. So basically, another thing is where Jesus says that he gets after the Pharisees, and he says that they would compass the sea only to make a proselyte, but then they made a child of the devil. Okay. Well, the sea for Jesus, sitting here in Israel, okay, would be going around the Mediterranean Sea. That would be going north, and it would be going south. The two verses I've heard used to kind of say this makes it look flat earth is four corners of the earth. When it talks about the four corners of the earth, it's north, south, east, west. And of course the west goes in that perfect circle. Okay, so those are points where they're going around, and basically that's all going around the earth. Another thing is like conspiracy theory they might bring up is, though, maybe you believe that the moon landing wasn't true. No, I believe the moon landing was true. I believe that NASA, yes, they have a liberal bias, but they really do present the evidence. They really do present true stuff. Because we in the creationist community can use what they put out there. Okay, for instance, the issue of moon dust. Now, this popped up back in the '60s, and then the liberals said, "Oh no, you're so stupid, and that's not working, and blah blah blah." And so they said, "Well, it's buried because they made it unpopular." But one of the top astronauts that made it to the moon back in the '70s, he made a machine to collect dust, and so that they could measure dust that was falling to the moon. And they made their calculations, and he forgot about it and then checked it out back again around 2006. So you always got to check with them if the records are at 2006 or not. Because if they're talking about something in the 70s, they don't have a clue. Okay, but the recent data was he discovered the readouts of this machine collecting dust. And what it amounts to is that you would have to have dust at around 1,300 feet. okay, on the moon. The moon would have to collect that much dust if it was 4.6 billion years old, which is what they claim. But in reality, it's only about 2.5 centimeters, which is what you see with the lunar landing photos. Okay? So, when we look at that, my question is this. If that's all faked, why would NASA, that argues for the Big Bang Theory, why would NASA provide me young Earth creationist evidence if it was fake? It doesn't make any sense. Okay? We're going to fake giving you information to argue with us about that we're being paid to try to get you to not think about? Seriously? So, all those conspiracy theories and crap, that's not what this is about. This is about seeking real evidence, seeking the truth, and going after stuff. They've had a lot of recent discoveries. All the galaxies, they found in the universe, they have a north axis point and a south axis point to the whole universe. And they've done the thing of the Planck scale and the WMAP, and what they've discovered is that when they research the cosmic background radiation, look on a flat screen, it looks like this thing going up and down here with this like perfectly lined axis. Now, Big Bang Theory wants all this stuff distributed chaotically, but instead you have this little line going up and down. Well, just like the Earth is not a square poster, okay? When we look at the Earth, you might see a map of the Earth. All right, well, we know it's in a globe. When you put it in a globe, when you put the map of the universe in a globe, that axis goes all the way around this big globe universe. And then when we shrink it, guess what? That axis, we call it the axis of evil because it was so evil to their evolutionary ideas, that axis goes right through the equator of the Earth. Perfectly goes to the equator of the Earth. So the whole universe sees the Earth as unique, and that is by raw evidence. When they look at the Earth, you go out of the Earth, and then you'll see these shells of galaxies and stars that shell around the Earth, like the universe looks like a giant onion that way. You cut in, you see all the layers. And other stuff, you just have to we'll have to get into deeper reading and stuff like that. For me, what this has meant is that the Earth is something that God made, and I'm standing on it, and my life is not crazy. When you are 6 or 7, they bring up this issue. Are you really prepared to think critically, to determine if it's true or false when you're 6 or 7 years old and your teacher is telling you this is what's true? No. You follow it because you're a good kid, okay? And these ideas are ideas that will change the way that you look at things. You don't study science to study evidence because you're taught it when you're a little kid. So it's like another Bible, okay? It's like the secular Bible. And they tell you these things. And then they tell you when you get a little older that animals come from other animals. Then you hear that people come from animals. Then you start thinking, well, I'm an animal. So, when I go about my relationship with a girl, or with whatever, but it's basically all animal functions. We're nothing but mammals, so do whatever you want to do. And then, that you get a little older and they tell you that the world is starting to boil up and, we've got to pay into these government programs to help out this stuff and that stuff, and we don't need to have a family, and, all of a sudden the government starts running your life, okay, with all these little ideas that they tell you as a child. The thing is that we have to be free, and you have to free your mind, and no one can make you free. But I'll tell you what, when I realized that this whole universe had a purpose, and the purpose was for us, that when I look at the destruction of the universe, I see the destruction because of sin. I see that God does not like a world where our families are torn apart and our hearts are broken and people are messed up. And when our lives are messed up it messed up everything. And so God loves us and He takes care of us, but everything here is twisted. And that twisting comes from sin, but salvation comes from the Lord. And Jesus came to the earth, and He had all this stuff go down on the earth, okay? And I know that people want to imagine space travel and meet aliens and live on other places. And I'll tell you what, the universe is a good place to go, but I wouldn't want to live out there. All right, so we'll catch you later on Bible Smack Ministries.